The scripture reading for this Sunday comes to us from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14. We are looking at verses 22 to 33. Jesus and the disciples have made a plan to move from one side of the Sea of Galilee to the other side. Let's see just how things are going to go for them. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It is a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you in the water." "Come," Jesus said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Permit me to tell you a little story as we get started. I remember when my brother and I were in grade school, and shortly after we moved to Illinois. It was bedtime. Now, the way that house was laid out, the way the closet space was, in our bedroom that my brother and I shared, the boys' bedroom, there was space in that closet for some of Dad's clothes. And so they were hung in Dad's half. So sometimes at night, Dad would come in and he would need to hang up some of his clothes, maybe his necktie and his jacket from teaching. And there was one particular night when Dad snuck in that my brother didn't hear a thing. I heard Dad sneaking in and quietly getting into the closet, but my brother had missed it. And then all of a sudden, Dad made a little more noise, and that startled my brother, and he startled and woke right up and said, "Oh, who is it? What's going on?" And my dad delivered the classic line. He turned around and we could hear him smiling in the dark, and he said, "It is I. Do not be afraid." And my brother and I, we just cracked up. Maybe we hadn't been to the same Bible study about walking on the water as our father had been, but I wonder if my dad had been waiting his entire life to quote Jesus saying, "It is I, do not be afraid." So my brother and I were laughing, and sure enough, here comes Mom's voice. "Robert Evans, quit stirring up the boys. They're supposed to be sleeping." And so then my dad goes, "Shh, you're getting me in trouble," which made us laugh even louder. And so then Mom's voice comes again, "Robert." And then Dad, we could see him gesturing, "Keep it down." So that's just a favorite memory that's connected to this scripture passage. It is I, do not be afraid. And boy, do we need to hear these kinds of words. Because sometimes I wonder if we feel a little bit like these disciples. It says, the boat was battered by the wind all night. The Greek word for battered by the wind, it takes a lot of syllables. It's like a 6-syllable word. So the Greek word for battered by the wind is, I've got to look at this. I just can't memorize this. Basana zamazan. Basana zamanon. Isn't that a mouthful? And it means to actually be put through an ordeal or being tormented. So the boat was battered all night, being that then the disciples were tormented all night dealing with the wind. So something that I wanted to take a quick moment to share is I went looking in Christian artwork, just looking for some pictures to illustrate Jesus walking in the water. And so we'll take just a quick look through this little art gallery that I put together. And that's quite something. That's almost like the ghostly Jesus. They made him a pretty pale shade right there. They could have given him a little more suntan in this artist's rendition. So I didn't quite go with this for our publicity picture. This is quite the beautiful sunset interpretation of Jesus walking on the water. But he hasn't made it to the boat yet, so we didn't go with this one. And then, of course, one that I like a lot, but the picture isn't quite on. It comes from Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. I had a chance to catch this panel. If you can see Jesus there and Peter next to him and the disciples in the background on the boat. If I had do-overs, I would have lined up right in front of that wood carving mural so I could get a good straight-on picture. Still, I think you can see it on the 3/4 angle. And of course, there's the stained glass window versions. This is also a very beautiful rendition. But then I came to this one. This one I decided upon as the candidate for our publicity artwork for Jesus walking on the water. So again, we have Jesus reaching out to Peter and pulling him up. And we also have the words here from our closing hymn, Eternal Father, Strong to Save. It's the Navy hymn. It's written all about God's coming out to us on the water. In this particular version, it's full of motion and emotion. If you look toward the disciples, you can see their reactions, some gesturing, some putting their hands up in surprise. Quite a full picture. And that artist is Philip Otto Runge. And tell you a little bit about him. Once I settled on this picture, I couldn't help looking up background to understand why this artist chose to paint the picture the way that he did. Because his picture is very much a study in emotion. He's telling us how he thinks the disciples might be feeling during this night. There's a different expression on the face of each one of those men. And so the scripture does tell us that they were terrified when they thought Jesus was a ghost. But again, I imagine they had another kind of shock when they saw Peter start to walk in the water, and then he began to sink. So there's all those feelings, all those expressions going on. And I cannot help but think about the parallels to our situation. Have we felt like we've been dealing with a lot of Basana Zamanon lately? Have we felt battered by the wind with all these kinds of changes? And it seems like we're going uphill against the blizzard to the schoolhouse, 5 miles each way. When we walk to school, the wind's against us. When we come home from school, the wind's against us. I have a sense that a lot of us have felt that way for these past several months. And so to have Jesus coming to the disciples and coming to us in the water, coming to us through the wind and the storm, I just have a feeling that's something all of us identify with. Also, with our artists today and our artwork today, in my research, I also learned that the artist, Philip Runge, that painting, he certainly felt those emotions in his life. He felt like he was going uphill against the wind. I learned that he was a frail child, a sickly child. So he dealt with health problems his entire life. When he was old enough, he went to work in his family shipping business, but he couldn't go out in the water. So he was put in, quote, the home office. So he was a shipping and receiving clerk working a desk job. His older brother, Daniel, knew that Philip had more ability than just a shipping clerk. So Daniel offered to send him to art school in Copenhagen, Denmark. So he sent him from Switzerland to Denmark to improve his artwork. And so we can see the results of his artistic training, that he did become an accomplished painter. And so Philip Runge may have had a limited body, but he had an active mind. And so with that active mind, he could express himself through art and letters and also theology. He did a fair amount of religious writing. And worthy of note, in his lifetime, probably the most famous person with whom he exchanged letters was Wolfgang von Goethe, that one German author of the 19th century. Also, the brothers Grimm. If you can think about Grimm's fairy tales, Philip Runge, 2 of the stories in there were written by him. And the brothers Grimm liked them enough to include them in their collection. And so Philip Runge, in his lifetime, he was physically limited, but he was not intellectually limited, nor was he spiritually limited by his situation. And so I find a good story for us of a Christian who had to walk against the wind, but found ways to be effective and to have meaning in his life. So again, this keeps speaking to the situations that we experience. Because I also know quite often when we have to get something done and face the wind, at first it's not so bad. It's a bit like a football game on a super windy day. In the first quarter, it's not so bad. But by the end of the game, we're saying to ourselves, "Oh Lord, don't let it come down to a field goal. Oh Lord, please do not let us have to kick the field goal into the wind. Let us get this thing in hand before the last minute." Life can feel that way. In the first quarter, oh, we can deal with this. This is not so bad. But as time goes by and that wind is battering against us, just as it says in the scripture, it was in the 4th watch of the night. It was the 4th quarter for the disciples. We do not know how tired they were getting. We do not know if they were ready to throw up their hands and say, "I've had it. Let's just pull in the oars and let the wind take us to whatever corner of Galilee it wants to take us," which could have been a very dangerous decision to give up control of their boat. I find it interesting that in the 4th watch, the 4th quarter, that's when Jesus shows up. That's when he comes out to them. He's probably figured it out. I think it's about time for me to go help them. I bet they're pretty tired. And that's a kind of parable for us, to remember that Jesus is always nearby. He was off in the hills praying, but he could see the water. He knew their condition. In the same way, Jesus is always nearby. So it's important for us to realize that Jesus is always nearby, ready to help us. It's also important to think about when we begin the life journey each day, to make sure we know where our Jesus is, to make sure that he's always welcome to join us in our boat, to be on our boat. And also the reminder that Jesus is also our spiritual windbreak, because the story says, once Jesus entered the boat, the wind stopped. The wind stopped. So again, lots of layers of meaning about this parable of spiritual life. When we invite Jesus into the boat, the wind stops. That's the way to be handling all the clouds, all the winds that we face. And so that's how we want to leave it today. Invite Jesus into our boat, keep Jesus in our boat, and remember, he's our windbreak. He is the master of land and sea. Amen.